I will move on then to our short presentation for the evening, which is Drew Carhart. Again, thank you, Drew, for stepping up. I think this might be the third time in a row.
I guess I like to talk, I guess. That's the way it goes. So I will share my screen. I was asked to give a little report on what I did this summer, actually what I did this winter. I'm titling this the Bringing Flagstaff to Fairbanks talk. So the FDSC, I think, like Chris can correct me if I'm wrong, but I think for some time has periodically and maybe not infrequently gotten contacted by people from around the nation, and I think sometimes beyond the United States, who are in their locale looking for some help with achieving some sort of control of sky glow, some sort of saving of the night or restoring of the night sky. And we have kind of a good test case here in the situation of Fairbanks, Alaska. What occurred was, I was going to fill you in on Fairbanks first. Forgot I put these slides together here the other night. Just as a brief overview, if you're not familiar, Fairbanks is kind of in the middle of Alaska. It's not out by the coast like Anchorage is, down to the south of it there. A few brief facts. It's a city, but it's only got 32,000 people in it. When you travel around it, it looks like it'd be larger than that, perhaps, population-wise. And I think it's the effect of, I think anybody who's been like around out in the west of the continental United, the lower 48, I should say, you have the effect of when you have wide open spaces and there's a town, the towns tend to be kind of oversized. They serve a large area. So Fairbanks is kind of like that too. It looks pretty much like a city, although it's not particularly elevated. But again, it's about the size of Kingman, Arizona. It's not that big a place, population-wise. Actually, what I looked up today is this year it's down below 30,000. They've been losing population. So it went from being the second largest city, kind of tied with Juneau, to third largest now officially. So it isn't particularly elevated. It's only 450 feet off sea level. And although there are mountains in really every direction from it. So what the mountains do between the ocean and it is they make it really dry there. It's technically, that didn't work. Technically, it's a desert. It gets less than a foot of liquid water precipitation a year. There are lots of scruffy looking trees there, spruce and birch and poplar, but they're growing on permafrost, and it's a very scrappy looking place, but it's also actually very dry. Their economy is basically got three roots to it. There are, reading backwards from what it says on the list here, there are two large military bases there, plus a National Guard base. So quite a bit of their economy is based on that. There's mining, a lot of energy mining, and there's still gold mining in the vast surrounding areas. And then there's the tourism market, which is a substantial part of their economy there. As far as nighttime goes, here you have the theoretical light pollution map. Alaska's got the three dots in it. That's Fairbanks in the center. It's Anchorage down at the coast down below it. And up on the north coast, there's not much population up around Prudhoe Bay, but those of you who are familiar with the energy industry at all know that they have energy to burn, and so they do. And generally, wherever you look around where there's any sort of energy, mining or drilling or refining, they tend to have naked light bulbs hanging everywhere. So you see that on the map here. But Fairbanks has a decent light dome, and unfortunately for the people there, it's growing. And so this is why some folks there got interested in trying to figure out if there's a way to stop that. This is a picture that I found online when I was preparing the 4 presentations that I gave up there. I thought, well, I need to find an illustration that shows the Northern Lights, because this is their winter tourism there. A lot of it's based on, they're right under the auroral oval. If you are all familiar with how auroras form around the North and South Pole, they're donuts over those places, and they're right under the donut there. So if there's an aurora anywhere, it'll tend to show up in Fairbanks. And so people do travel there for that. But this illustration shows it perfectly. Here we have a clear sky. And off on the left-hand side up in the sky, you see the aurora. And then in the right half, you see the light of Fairbanks shining up in the sky and keeping the people from the city from seeing that aurora up there. And some of the people there who are intimately involved in aurora watching have been watching that sky globe grow the past few years, and they didn't exactly understand why. I knew right away why. They've been switching out their high-pressure sodium lights the state has on the state-run roads, and the city has been too within the city, for white LEDs, and they're up your sky glow considerably. So anyway, they contacted the FDSC, and you don't have to read this whole thing, but it was basically we're trying to figure out what to do. And we've heard about Flagstaff or read about Flagstaff, or one of the people up there who's involved in this. His father used to teach in Flagstaff, I guess. And so he had been down visiting in his youth a number of times to the Flagstaff area and remembered how dark the sky was. So they contacted the FDSC, said, can you recommend somebody or send somebody up? And I got sent. So this was what I ended up doing. The trip was arranged by their tourism people and coordinated with a number of different groups there. I ended up speaking to their Economic Development Corporation, and specifically the sub-energy task force of that group. So that group was obviously primarily interested in the looking at what the energy waste was represented by all this light shining up into the sky, and whether there were ways of improving upon that. I spoke to the Chamber of Commerce, and of course the focus there was on the business end of things and the commercial aspects of preserving the night sky and perhaps saving money for the community and things too. Alaska has, instead of having counties, they have boroughs. So the borough assembly is basically the same as a county board. So the primary instigator of getting someone up there to talk about light pollution was an assembly person, and their perspective is looking at management for their borough. So what about lighting that the borough directly controls, or what about ordinances that the borough might institute to address lighting issues? And then I spoke for the annual tourism conference up there. And of course, the audience there were all people who were somewhere or another involved in the tourism industry. So again, the focus there would go back to the protecting the night sky as a very valuable asset for them during their wintertime season. In each case, I started out by introducing them to the whole concept of what this light pollution is and where it comes from, because most people, again, haven't looked at this analytically or really read about it or thought about too much why it's happening and where it's coming from. And then in each case, even though a particular group might be interested more in one facet or another, I let them each group know that there's a number of reasons why it would matter to the community. And again, I've touched on this before in other talks, but besides the dark sky issue, there's the ecological issues, there's the human health issues, there's the safety and aesthetics issues, and then there is the energy issue, and that is a notable issue up in Alaska because energy is expensive. When they exceed what they can get in via wire from coal-fired power plants, they have to switch to diesel generators to create electricity, and that's very expensive for them. And they're also in the crosshairs of practical results from climate change up there. When they start having issues with the permafrost melting and things, they're kind of ahead of people in some other parts of the world in realizing that there's things going on. So energy is a notable issue up there. So all of these, talking about the issues, again, something that I think is important that we do and that I always do is explain that all of this can be controlled. There are practical ways of addressing these issues. And of course, up in Fairbanks, as I want to do anywhere, the prime thing is to refer back to Flagstaff and show here we have Flagstaff that it isn't some theory in a paper somebody wrote. It's a living example of how you manage sky glow and stray light and light pollution. And so that's the generality of what I would present to each of the groups. Again, both in what I presented and what the follow-up questions tended to be would tend to usually lean more towards the specific focus of that particular group. But this is what I would present. And then out of the Flagstaff solution, giving this as an introduction to these people who really didn't have much background at all in what we talk about, it wasn't the place to start going into talking about one model of light fixture over another model, or number of foot candles on a roadway or on a sidewalk or something like that. Again, we're talking about starting out. So the starting out place with the Flagstaff solution, the thing I really stressed up there was what we've put at kind of the top of the list for our important aspects of the Flagstaff solution, and that's the community involvement. To each group, I made it clear that from my perspective, my advice was that if they want to really instigate change, they have to start out with this idea of building a community coalition that's going to work to it, because it takes time, and it takes involvement of more than one special interest group or one small group in a community to do things. So that's the part of the Flagstaff solution that I really stressed in this talk, because again, it's the key starting point. If they can't get over that step, there's no real reason to be seriously talking about developing ordinances or getting more people to change things or whatever. So in conclusion, what did I find personally? Not a lot of startling things, because I've been addressing these issues with people for quite a few years. The thing that was different up there, they want to protect their night sky, not to see the stars, but because they make money off of seeing the northern lights. So that's a little bit different, but it's really not that much different than seeing the stars. They have some very odd lighting issues because there's, again, this point that their streetlights don't run in the summertime. They only run in the wintertime. And all winter long, there's snow on the ground. So their landscape is white all the time that their streetlights are on. And as I said to a number of people up there in talking more on the side about lighting practices, if an organization like the IES, the ISNA, if you prefer, developed its recommended practices in a place that was painted white all the time, they would look different than they do. The recommended practices from the IESNA come from the lower 48, and there's really no consideration about how different outdoor illumination would be if the ground reflected back, 94% of the light shining on it instead of only 16% of the light shining on it. So that was a little different too. But
if I can interrupt briefly, Drew.
Sure.
I think a number of people here may not know what IES means, and that's the Illuminating Engineering Society in North America, which generates recommendations for how outdoor lighting should be done. How much light do you need in a parking lot or a roadway or a retail area? And that's what Drew was pointing out, is that those recommendations have been developed with kind of average environments in mind. And when the ground is white, you can imagine they would have come up with probably different recommendations.
I sure would have. And I mentioned that to someone up there. I said, if the local university there, the engineering department or somebody somewhere in Alaska wanted to actually do modeling and come up with recommended lighting practices for Alaska, that would be a tremendous thing, because it would be a great service to them, because it would look a lot different. But yes, some of us, me especially, can go on forever about the sad state that the fact that most communities in the United States pull this thing off the shelf, these recommended practices that really aren't based in science whatsoever. But that's a different talk. So anyway, again, I would reiterate something that I sort of already know, is that people need an introduction. Well, Chris just proved it there, because I used jargon by referring to the IES, and nobody else would know what that is if you're not involved in lighting stuff. So people need to start from scratch and get a proper education, even if it's a very basic one, in the concepts that we're really actually dealing with when you talk about preserving dark skies. It can be as simple as just explaining the idea of putting light in the right place as opposed to the wrong place. That I can show this graph to fifth graders, which I have this graphic, and they understand it. It's really pretty simple. If you want to talk more about energy, which I did with the energy people, I pointed out how you get a light fixture like this one. There is a cut sheet from a manufacturer on a current street light model. You can take the data that they provide on lighting distribution and put it into a program that gives you the little diagram in the lower right there, which is showing the sphere of light coming off the light fixture, and what percentages of that light from the lamp inside is going in different directions. And you can see for this example of that actual fixture on that page there, that less than a quarter of the light coming off the lamp is going down into that green quadrant, which is down toward the roadway. And a full half of the light coming out of the lamp is going up into the red and out into the sky. This is pretty straightforward. They don't put that graphic on that cut sheet for that light. That's for darn sure. You have to go hunting for it. But again, explaining to people that you can figure these things out, that the data is there. You don't have to just pick it out by saying, gee, that's a pretty light fixture, we should put that into town. That's the kind of the help that people who are unfamiliar with these concepts need. They need to be shown that you can understand this stuff. There's, again, reiterating that fact that not everybody in the community will necessarily think that the dark sky issue in itself is enough to fight for, but there might be other parts of light pollution that they do think are worth fighting about. This was brought home in the second conference I had, a Zoom conference I had before I went up there. There were two borough assembly people on that conference, and the one was the fellow whose idea it was to get this whole thing started. And his business is leading tours for people, tourists, to watch or go out and watch auroras. So some of the other people, like on the assembly, thought, well, he's just interested in this for his personal business reasons. But one of the other assembly person who was in on that call was very interested to hear that you could also be talking about energy savings, and especially interested to hear that you could be talking about reducing ecological impact of stray light. So bringing people on board for the other reasons can be important in developing a community effort too. And I touched on this last month, I guess it was, when I talked about the Flagstaff Solution in general, but I find this to be really true, is that I think that a lot of effort toward dark sky restoration and preservation suffers in this country, especially, maybe around the world, but by people giving poor advice. And again, not picking on, and not, it's not, certainly not the only case, but just as an example, like what I showed last month, that people are shown this picture, and it's got cartoons of 4 light fixtures, and one of them on the right is labeled best, B-E-S-T. I mean, that's that's the best you can do to protect the night sky. And that's really a lie, even though it's a cartoon, because it's certainly bad in any way, shape, or form to have a white light outside if you're trying to protect the night sky. It's much better to have an amber colored light. It's even better to turn that light down to the lowest level you can have and start thinking about level and not just whether you've got a light on or off. And then, of course, really best is not using a light at all when you don't need it, in a locale where it's needed or at a time that it's not needed. So again, to me, this is being given poor advice because, oops, how did I do that? I'm sorry. Back to where, oh, well, that didn't work. Somehow or another, I rejected on my picture. Anyway, let's do that again. The thing is if people are told that this is simple, and this is all they need to do, then this is what they'll do. And I think people in various places have done what they thought they were being advised to do and it was going to cure it, and they found, gee, the sky didn't get any darker. You know, why didn't it get any darker? It's because they got poor advice. If they got it from the lighting company, that is probably a bad sign in the first place. Anyway, what's next with Fairbanks? I made it clear to them that at this point the ball is in their court. I tried to lay the groundwork for them and give them some advice, but FDSC isn't in a place where we can, go up there and camp out or something, and bring a whole team in to start the process for them. On the other hand, I obviously offered to supply additional assistance, and they have my contact information. They have our organization's contact information, and I think we will be hearing from them again. This is a question that we have to figure out as FDSC management, is how much we can donate, or whether we'd ever get into the idea of selling, which I don't know. We haven't really discussed it, but the service is that people in various locales will need to get things done. That's something we need to work out. But again, I feel like now I have a personal relationship with the folks up there, and they have my phone number. So I could see myself potentially going back to Fairbanks sometime or another. We'll see how that plays out. So that's what I had together on that. I will stop sharing. I don't know if there's any questions or discussion or whatever at that point.
I'd like to make a comment. Sure. Drew, that was fabulous.
Thank you.
Not an understatement, but wonderful outreach work and good graphics. And it does sound like the ball's in their court. Absolutely. But you sure took a very good first step.
Thank you. I appreciate that. I would say the reception overall was quite good. In those 4 places, well, the first one ended up being virtual. I was talking to them from my hotel room, and that was just because of people's schedules and somebody having COVID. But the other three, I had audiences there, and there was quite a bit of interaction. So, which is always a good sign. You know, it wasn't to a silent, motionless crowd. So.
Drew, what's our competition in terms of our expertise as far as dark skies? I don't mean just lighting engineers. You know, they may be a dime a dozen, but with our expertise with the dark skies, you know, who else is out there that they could go to?
I think Chris and Don could talk about that more because that's more of their commercial end of things. But my opinion would be there needs to be more science behind the dark sky work. Mm-hmm. At the moment, a lot of it's still based in conjecture, and so the different people who would market themselves as having expertise probably all have different opinions about things. Their picture on the bottom of what a good picture looks like and a bad picture looks like, I think that would look different in different places. Flagstaff has been earnestly addressing the color of light, the spectrum of light, more than anybody anywhere. And I'm sorry, I understand enough science to know that an awful lot of it comes down to that. You know, it's something you can't just say, well, it's just too hard to convince people not to have white lights. It's the bane, it's the root of the problem in a lot of cases. Yeah, so I don't know of anybody else who's talking about it except for around a couple of astronomical observatories around. I know Chris and you and Don probably interesting.
I think maybe IDA may be the next big group, but Chris hasn't been too happy with their lighting standards. And from what I gather in past conversations, it doesn't measure up to what we feel is an adequate standard. So
I wouldn't call IDA's standards, but they do have recommendations, and their recommendations are not as clear as they could be. And also the IDA is still very much focused on raising awareness that dark skies are a thing and that people ought to be concerned about it broadly, not just astronomers. And that message still needs to get out. But for places where you're actually looking for results, you need more guidance than that. You need more guidance, more specific guidance. And that's part of what we're trying to set ourselves up to provide. Most communities, Fairbanks was extraordinarily lucky that they reached out to a place which had good, well-founded guidance to give. But most communities just reach out, and I'll tell you, there is a long line of interested parties who will give you advice for what kind of lighting you want. And if you want dark sky lighting and you reach out, you're likely going to get a lot of those. You'd be lucky if you are contacted by one who really is guided by really dark sky science principles rather than selling the product of their company. Almost every lighting company out there that sells fixtures, they offer free advice. Absolutely. They offer free design. They will design your parking lot for you with their products. So that's a very hard playing field to break into when there are so few which have really just dark skies at heart and don't have an economic interest tied to it.
I mentioned to Drew and to Chris when we got this call that I thought it was quite timely and maybe a sign that we are moving in the right direction, that with our new mission, that is to spread the word of the Flagstaff Solution to other communities. We've been in existence only a month when we got the call from the Fairbanks people, basically asking us to provide what we are now set up to provide, and to Drew for stepping up to be willing to go to Fairbanks in January and make the presentations up there too. One question though, Drew, did you have any sense that there will be any opposition in the various parts of Fairbanks that might be a problem going forward?
I actually asked that not during presentations, but I had dinner with my hosts up there. I did some driving around to look at lighting with people and stuff. And that was one question that I asked is, where might there be opposition? And the only thing that came up was, well, the energy industry that fires up diesel generating plants when there's a shortage of power, and the coal burning industry, they might not be happy to see the city using less electricity in the end, but that wasn't a huge serious. I can't picture them. They weren't saying, boy, they're going to fight this tooth and nail or something or other, because you always have that concept. And, some energy companies have earnestly supported conservation work, but no, it wasn't like, now we weren't putting dollar signs on things. I didn't come up with a new lighting plan for their entire city and say, this will cost you, $8.2 million to redo or something or other. Because at that point, that's where you start getting arguments. Or the only talk about instituting ordinances was through the borough assembly, and it wasn't a proposal or something, or it was just exploratory thinking of, we could start out the process by saying we'll set up regulations for the lighting that we control on our own facilities, on our own grounds and parks and things like that, and then perhaps also put in ordinances for the area that they have control over, so it'd be non-incorporated areas around there.
I don't think lighting load would be a huge contributor to the load. I think it's mostly air conditioning, heating is where most of your megawatt hour load's going to be.
Yeah,
lighting's
right.
Not insignificant, and I have no idea what it is. I'd throw a dart and say maybe 20-25%, but
it's probably less than that for the municipality. I don't know, but
it shouldn't be a big problem for the energy people, I don't think.
No. So again, I would personally see that as, but again, when I asked that particular question, who would potentially be against this sort of thing, and with a little bit of thought and head scratching, I was like, well, maybe the coal company, So, and now one thing I did notice when it comes to ordinances, I was probably in the tallest building in Fairbanks, which is a conference center hotel, pretty much in the city center of town. And I was on the 7th floor, and my room faced south. And looking south, I would say a little over 1.5 miles to 2 miles away, down the highway down there. I know what those lights were down there. They were car lots, because there's nothing lit up like a car lot nowadays. It used to be, in my experience, most towns, municipalities, the most egregiously bad lighting outside was sports fields. You could tell when there was the game at the high school thing, or the lights were on at the town softball field or whatever. Now it's the car lots. And I'm like, oh, I know what those are down there. So I could see potentially, if they put in ordinances, those are people who would complain, because I could tell from 2 miles away that they had unshielded sideways facing light fixtures, that were, because I could look at them, I didn't need my telescope to tell what those were. So, if they got to the point of having ordinances, I can see those people saying, complaining if they were told that they had to replace those. But again, that's down the road somewhere. And there's always the questions when you go into ordinances, what you grandfather in. But that's for discussing later on. They need to get more going before they actually start saying, we're going to jump into full regulation of everything tomorrow.